Hi, and welcome back to another Watchlist rundown of 5 films from the world of boutique Blu-ray that I've watched recently that I think are really worth checking out. And we'll start with a label I haven't talked about in a while, and I'm going to talk about The Deadly Affair from Indicator, starring James Mason, Harriet Anderson, and Simone Signoret. I was sort of going through my Indicator, what spines, and kind of going along going, did I miss any, especially in the early numbers. This is being spine number 38, and I'm realising I hadn't seen The Deadly Affair, sticking it on and finding myself in the middle of a spy thriller, starring James Mason as a guy, Charles Dobbs, who has a meeting with a guy at the start to rule him out from being a communist and having communist persuasions anymore, and sort of clearing him, and then waking up the next day to find that this man had killed himself. He's quite dubious about all of this, and he decides to investigate a little more into this because he just can't reconcile the person that he met yesterday is the guy that killed himself later that day. It doesn't seem to make much sense. And, well, you know, it's a spy thriller. It'd be a pretty short film if it wasn't for that. All the while, at home, his wife, Harriet Anderson, looking fantastic as usual, she's having affairs and is kind of playing away from home, which just sort of wants more of his attention, but he's sort of married to the job in that kind of way. And it turns out, when I got to the end of it, I was like, this is very like a John le Carré sort of story. And sure enough, it is one of the Smiley stories, except they had to change the name from Smiley to Charles Dobbs because Paramount bought the rights to the Smiley character name when they bought Spy That Came In From the Cold. Anyway, what you have is a pretty tight-ish British spy thriller that has some twists and turns that kind of touches on all those touch points like communism and insider involvement and various nations being involved with each other, all that stuff that tended to come out in those kind of spy thrillers, and it's extremely watchable. In fact, I would say it's quite fun. It even has James Mason doing an okay James Mason job. Sometimes James Mason is a bit hit and miss. In this, because of his marriage relationship and that kind of stuff, it sort of fits well with his dourness and his kind of downbeatness, and he only really gets excited when he's in the middle of the hunt, so to speak. And in some way, that I think that's really positive for it, and a pretty decent watch, and very much reminds me of the type of thing that Indicator used to do a lot of in finding these kind of studio films, putting them out, restoring them with some decent extras, and giving you a hand. And I sort of miss those days because now we get this mix of Hollywood and box sets that are themed, some Mexican stuff, the Roland. I mean, it's all great, but also maybe there's only so many of these films you can really get your hands on, and so to speak, and they've done a lot of them, but still worthy to check this out. Next up is an absolute stonker. It's a Criterion release from last year, 4K. It's a film by Mikhail Kalatozov called I Am Cuba, or So Cuba, as it is known in its native language. And this is like a very odd film because obviously Kalatozov was Russian, probably Russian from around there anyway, and he's making a film about Cuba. Now, obviously, there are ties communist as well. See, well, I sort of themed this, didn't I? The way I timed it together. All very exciting. And this film's, it starts off, and one of the first things that catches your eye is the fact that it was funded by the militarists and by the revolution in some ways. And it sort of gives an insight into what kind of films this is, which is, you know, a story about why a revolution could happen and did happen and the kind of things that mattered. But it's really interesting because it's told from the perspective of the country itself. It's told as if Cuba is watching what's happening on its land, and it creates this amazing kind of cinemascape with which to tell that about people. And it tells about things that are unjust and unfair, as you'd expect. It tells about the very grave disparity between people, you know, broken into 4 stories here, and about different people, about what they're forced to do in order to survive. And even when they do that, how sometimes things happened from outside forces that meant they weren't really in control of their own lives. It's harrowing. It's really effective. It's beautiful to look at because Kalatozov just has this great eye for the moving camera, moving in and between people and getting a sense and feel of what Cuba was like. And it's really such a magnificent thing to view and take hold of. Like, I mean, stick that in 4K, and it's even something more amazing than what it would be beforehand. Because obviously, I think there's some YouTube rips of this, etc., that are decent, but there's just something a bit extra and a bit special. Especially stick that Criterion logo on the front, and you've got a couple of extra star points on your rating. But it definitely, if you've liked any of Karl Kozlov's other films like Queens of Flying, Never Never Since his as well, this is right up there with all of them, and is really special. And those 4 distinct stories that tell of people and relationships and outside influences and what it's like to live in that kind of environment and what that feels like, and when it just gets too much, what are you resorting to? It's just an absolutely brilliant film. Sticking with the idea of being stuck behind closed doors or stuck in a place that you should be calling home, we'll talk about Green Room from Second Sight. This is lovely hardbox, as normal. I swore I was giving these up. You know that I said I only need the bit that is the films inside. But you know, the books, the essays are really good, and it feels good in the hand. This was a real surprise. I actually knew nothing about Green Room. It just tells the story of a punk band who get to play a festival in Barn for a far right group, and as they're leaving, they spot something to the point that they're not able to leave, and they're stuck in the green room, so to speak, fearing for their lives from whatever this band of people is up to. And in its own right, it would be sort of like whatever, but it's really elevated by one, that series. It just has tension the whole way through it. Like, it never gets turned down, and it has a couple of amazing central performances. One by Anton Yelchin, rest in peace. A couple of others, but also like, the bad guy is played by Patrick Stewart. Now, probably famed if anybody's seen Green Room, the Patrick Stewart, and it's not, I wouldn't even say it's an inspired piece of casting, because as the extras kind of talk about, it wasn't an inspired piece of casting. It was one of those, you want to be in this movie? You sure? I mean, would love to have you, but are you sure? And yet he pulls it off magnificently. He's so menacing. You know, he doesn't even have to say make it so, and people are doing what he says. That's diversity in acting, that's all I'm saying. But just a pure tension fest. And when you talk about films that are very tense the whole way through, Green Room is definitely it. It might be too tense for some, but if you've been buying Second Sight releases and watching Second Sight releases and enjoying them, this is another one of those very, very good ones, and a terrific release the whole way through. Great long interviews with cast and crew and director and all that kind of stuff, and all very revealing as it goes through. And yes, of course, you'd love to get the lovely cardboard. Who loves nice cardboard? Great artwork, as you can see. Like, it really is fabulous. And even special shout out for the back of it as well. I think that is rather beautiful. Great film. Talking about tension fest or otherwise, this one's slightly more on the sleazy side. This one's from '88. This was the release probably from last year of House on the Edge of the Park, part of the Italian collection, I believe. In fact, there's probably reverse artwork on this that does exactly that. I haven't flipped it yet, so let's do that right now. There we go. And you get the picture of the switchblade on the back. It gives you an idea. This is, again, a bit like Green Room. It's a bit of a people are locked in a house kind of idea. It starts off with a rather violent kind of rape scene of somebody in a car, and we get the idea that the central character is David Hess, I think, from Last House on the Left. He's a bit of a bad dude. There we go. Artwork sorted. Pretty. He's a bit of a bad dude, and he invites himself and a friend of his to a house party, essentially, with these rich people at the end of it, and they basically torture them, and like I say, it's very sleazy. Like, I'll not dress it up in any other way aside from saying, like, there's a lot of boobs, there's a lot of sleaziness, there's a lot of people standing around naked being made to pose in this kind of power struggle that's happening in this house. And on one hand, that would be kind of just, does this need to be here? But it does create this veneer and atmosphere the whole way through it that has that edge of tension, but that you're actively like really rooting against this guy, because you're showing him the whole way through he's just a bad dude, but his friend is a really interesting character insofar that he seems a bit more innocent, but he's carried away in this kind of same thing, and it makes it, you know, by the end of it, and it's an Italian film, like slasher film of some sort. It's got twists and turns. That's the genre. That's what makes these things good. But I found this very, very watchable, very entertaining, and I loved the resolution of it at the end. Like I say, lots of icky kind of stuff. But this is by Ruggero Deodato, who also did Cannibal Holocaust. It's a pretty nice mix of films to be associated with between this and the other one. And like 4K again, these things look great. They look amazing. I really like House on the Edge of the Park, and actually a lot of the 4Ks that Idiot have done, the upgrades, have all been very good. Absurd, Anthropophagus, Burial Ground, this, Eyeballs coming out soon. There's plenty of them. They've all been well worth picking up, and really these are premiere releases now of these Italian films. Absolutely terrific as I knock something over on my desk. Oh boy, last one I'm going to talk about is from Vinegar Syndrome, but Vinegar Syndrome Lambs. And my good friend Solid Ronan talked about this when it came out, and this is Sex Mission. Great name, kind of makes it that it's going to be like a companion piece to House on the Edge of the Park in sleaziness, and it's not. It's very different. I mean, this is one of these things that could very well have been a second run release, still might be someday, and it basically tells the story of a guys who are going to basically long-term cryogenic freezing, whatever, and I'll wake up and it turns out that they're the only men left in the world, and history has sort of been rewritten after the experiment has happened to say that men maybe never existed, or that it was a genetic mistake, and they're fighting with their survival to stay as men in this in this world that is surrounded by beautiful women, and it's an Eastern European film, and it's really charming. Like, I have to say, there are this kind of this split between these guys who I wouldn't say were the best looking guys in the world, but they're surrounded by all these beautiful women, and these women have no sense of who men were and what they do, aside from being told, like, don't let men use their masculine ways on you to twist and bedevil you. It's sort of a play on like ancient, I would say 15th century witches and stuff. It's highly entertaining. It is a bit of a sex comedy in some ways, but without so much sex. But there is a lot of short skirts, almost like Bond ways. There's a bit of boobage in it, for sure. And I found it utterly charming. Like, there's no doubt about it. It's kind of its own thing. I don't think there's very much like it, but it takes the premise of something like Y: The Last Man, makes it into a film. Well, lots of laughs and lots of humour, and even up to the very end of it, when you get your resolution of it and you get to find out a bit more about what's going on, it still retains its charm, and it's why it sort of is most akin to, you know, something that I would have found on second run as being a bit of an oddball, but incredibly charming and watchable in its own way. And, you know, Polish film that it is, I think it's absolutely terrific and should be watching. And for me, there's nothing else really like it that I can think of, but utterly fabulous. Really love that, and some very nice accompanying extras for that. But there are my 5 releases that I've got to talk about, and 5 good ones to talk about. What have you been watching recently? What have you been up to? I've sort of been trying to do some label centric stuff recently in terms of grouping my watching around certain labels. You've probably seen my last 2 watch lists. I've had Second Sight. I've been making my way through most of Second Sight's output for this year. High bar, as you'd expect, and I just got the hitchers set in. Haven't cracked the plastic on it yet. You know, I've only had it a week or so. Like, who could expect me to watch it in that kind of ridiculous time? We'll see, but I'll catch us again soon, and I hope you are all doing very well. Alright, take care, all the best, see you soon, bye.